All her years of existence, never had she witnessed such an omen. She hurried back to the village, her thoughts racing, whatever was happening. If you are to make amends, you must go to the land of the dead. Find Majoke and ask her for forgiveness. Only then will you have peace. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the trees, Yaomi balanced an earthen pot gracefully on her head, her staff in hand as she led Tade deep into the forest of Iku, the forest of death. The forest was dense and foreboding, its towering trees casting long eerie shadows. The air was thick with an unnatural silence, broken only by the sound of their footsteps crunching the leaves beneath them. Tade followed behind her, his heart hammering in his chest. The farther they went, the more his fear grew. Every step felt heavier than the last. He wanted to ask questions, to demand to know what awaited him, but the weight of the forest's atmosphere made him silent. When they reached the heart of the forest, the sight that greeted Tade made his blood run cold. Two men, dressed in white loincloths, stood beside an open grave. Their expressions were emotionless, their gazes fixed on Tade as if they had been waiting for him. Tade froze in his tracks, his legs refusing to move.
Yeah?
He said with a trembling voice,
Who's that grave for?
Yaomi ignored him. Instead, she lowered the earthen pot from her head, placing it gently on the ground. Kneeling beside it, she began to chant in a language Tade didn't understand. The words were rhythmic and haunting. When she finished, Yaomi stood up, her sharp eyes piercing through Tade's growing terror. "It's time," she said simply yet firm. From the earthen pot, Yaomi pulled out a necklace with a glowing red pendant at its center. She held it out to Tade, who hesitated before reaching out to trembling hands to take it. "This necklace will glow 3 times, Yaomi explained, her tone grave. "Each glow marks your progress in the land of the dead. If the 3rd glow fades and you have not accomplished your mission, you will never be able to return to the land of the living." Tade's hands trembled as he stared at the necklace, the weight of her words pressing on him.
"What happens if I fail?"
he asked, his voice barely audible. Yaomi's expression hardened. "You will belong to the dead," she said coldly. "Forever." "Now," Yaomi continued, pointing to the coffin lying beside the grave. "Step into it." Tade's knees buckled. He turned to Yaomi, panic evident in his wide eyes.
"Yeah, please. I can't."
"There is no other way," Yaomi snapped. "You must confront what you have brought upon yourself. Enter the coffin, Tade. Now." The 2 men standing by the grave moved closer, their silent presence unnerving. With no other choice, Tade swallowed his fear and climbed into the wooden coffin, his body trembling violently. "Close your eyes," Yaomi instructed, her voice softer now, but still firm. Tade obeyed, squeezing his eyes shut as the 2 men placed the lid over him, sealing him in darkness. The 2 men lifted the coffin and lowered it into the open grave. Tade could hear the muffled sounds of earth being shoveled over the coffin, each thought sending waves of panic through his body. He wanted to scream, to beg them to stop, but his throat felt paralyzed by fear. Above the ground, Yaomi took the earthen pot filled with the sacred water and placed it carefully atop the freshly covered grave. "This pot contains water blessed by the spirits," she said to the 2 men. "If the water dries up before he returns, his soul will be lost to the land of the dead." Inside the coffin, Tade's breathing was ragged, his chest heaving with each panicked breath. The darkness was suffocating, pressing against him from all sides. Suddenly, he felt a pull, like an invisible hand yanking him downward. The air around him grew colder, and the darkness seemed to ripple and shift. Then, Tade felt himself falling into a void. Tade's eyes fluttered open and he found himself lying on his back, submerged in shallow water. The liquid was cool, but it wasn't ordinary water. It shimmered with an otherworldly glow. He sat up abruptly, his breath hitching as he realized he was surrounded by water on all sides, stretching endlessly into the horizon. Panic gripped him. He didn't remember how he got there. The last thing he recalled was being buried alive and the muffled sound of dirt being shoveled over him. "Am I dreaming?" he asked, his voice shaky. He pinched his arm, expecting the sharp sting of pain to wake him up, but instead, his fingers passed right through his flesh as though he were made of mist. Tade screamed in terror, but no sound came out. His mouth was open, his throat strained, but the silence was deafening. He clutched his chest, his eyes darting around the strange watery expanse. He was utterly alone, and the realization made his legs weak. As Tade moved deeper into the land, the necklace around his neck began to glow faintly. He stopped and looked down at it, his heart pounding. The first glow, a reminder that his time was running out. Tade wandered aimlessly through the radiant land, the weight of his task pressing heavily on his shoulders. He was lost, desperate, and running out of time. As he continued, his eyes caught sight of something that stood out against the ethereal backdrop, a massive gate wreathed in flames. The fire didn't burn as normal flames would. It flickered, casting eerie shadows on the shimmering ground. Without a second thought, Tade ran towards it. The closer he got, the more he felt an overwhelming heat emanating from the gate. Yet, it didn't scorch his skin. Standing in front of the gate was a ghostly man, tall and gaunt, his face expressionless. His translucent form shimmered faintly. Tade's heart pounded as he approached, his voice trembling.
Please, I'm looking for Majoke.
He said, his hands trembling. The gatekeeper's glowing eyes locked into Tade, and after a long heavy silence, he spoke. Majoke resides beyond the river of mist, he said, his voice deep and echoing as though it came from all directions. Follow me. The gatekeeper gestured for Tade to follow. Tade hesitated for a moment, but knew he had no choice. Steeling himself, he stepped through the flames. An eerie river stretched before them, its waters dark and swirling with thick mist. A small wooden boat floated by the shore. "Get in," the gatekeeper commanded, motioning toward the boat. Tade hesitated, fear gripping him as he stared at the ominous river. The misty water exuded an unnatural chill that sent shivers down his spine, but he swallowed his fear and climbed into the boat, his movements shaky. The gatekeeper untied the boat and pushed it into the river, stepping in gracefully behind Tade. Without a word, he began to paddle, the sound of the paddle cutting through the water echoing eerily. The mist swirled thicker around them. Tade clenched the sides of the boat, his knuckles white, shadows flickered in the mist, their presence heavy and suffocating. The journey felt endless, the silence only broken by the rhythmic splash of the paddle. Tade's fear grew with each passing moment, but he forced himself to remain calm. Finally, they approached a swirling portal. It was massive, its edges crackling with energy that radiated power. As they drew closer, the energy from the portal intensified, making Tade's necklace glow brightly. The second glow. The boat stopped just before the portal, and the gatekeeper turned to Tade. "This is where I leave you," he said. "Step into the portal. It will take you to her." Tade opened his mouth to ask another question, but before he could speak, a powerful force pulled at him. He screamed as the energy of the portal enveloped him, dragging him into its swirling depths. When Tade opened his eyes again, he was lying on solid ground. The world around him was dark, illuminated only by a faint glow that seemed to come from the air itself. The land was barren, filled with jagged rocks and twisted trees. The air was heavy, making it hard to breathe. As Tade struggled to his feet, he saw her. Majoke stood a few feet away, her ghostly form both beautiful and terrifying. Her hollow eyes burned with a faint light. Tade's knees gave out and he fell to the ground, bowing his head.
Majoke,
He said, his voice trembling.
Please, forgive me. I was desperate. I didn't mean to.
Silence! Majoke's voice boomed, echoing through the barren land. Tade flinched, his body trembling as he dared not raise his head. You stole from the dead, she continued, her voice cold and unforgiving. Why should I forgive you? Tade sobbed, his tears falling freely.
Please, I'll do anything. I was wrong. I want to make it right. I want peace of mind.
Majoke regarded him for a long moment before speaking. I'll forgive you only on one condition, she said, her tone unwavering. The gift of immortality that was granted to you during the fortification ritual will be taken back. Tade froze. His heart sank at her words. The ritual had made him invulnerable to unnatural death. Losing that gift would mean losing the very essence of what had kept him alive through everything.
Please, is there no other way? Take something else. Anything.
But Majoke's expression didn't change. That is my condition. Accept it or remain here forever. In that moment, the necklace around Tade's neck began to glow again, brighter than before. The third glow. No! Tade cried, clutching the pendant as if he could stop it from glowing. The glow intensified until it was blinding, and in that moment, everything went black. It had been 10 long days since Tade ventured into the land of the dead. The sacred water atop his grave, placed by Yaomi, had dried completely, leaving behind a cracked, patched residue. Yaomi sat outside the makeshift hut, her withered face drawn with exhaustion and worry. She had lost all hope. Tade is gone, she muttered, her voice heavy with resignation. The spirits have claimed him. With a deep sigh, she ordered the two men who had helped bury Tade to exhume his body. As they dug into the dry soil, Yaomi stood nearby, clutching her staff tightly. When they finally lifted Tade's coffin from the grave and opened it, the sight shocked everyone. Tade's body looked as fresh as the day they buried him. His skin smooth, his features peaceful, as if he were merely sleeping. Yaomi frowned deeply, her keen eyes narrowing. This is not normal. The spirits must have preserved him. She chanted incantations, sprinkling herbs over his still body. She called out to the spirits, her voice firm and commanding. But Tade remained motionless. Finally, in despair, she turned her back to leave, accepting defeat. But then, a sudden sound broke the silence. The loud sneeze startled everyone, and Yaomi turned sharply. Tade's eyes fluttered open. A smile spread across Yaomi's face, a rare, genuine expression of relief and triumph. After Tade's return from the land of the dead, he spent hours sitting alone, contemplating his choices and the consequences of his actions.
It's time to move on.
Tade finally decided.
I need to start anew. This time, I'll do things right.
He knew staying in Ajekun would only remind him of his past mistakes. The village was too small, its people too watchful. He packed what little he had and made his way to the motor park, determined to leave his old life behind. He bought a ticket to Ibadan, a bustling city where he hoped to build a new life on a clean slate. The bus rumbled along the dusty road, carrying Tade and several other passengers. He sat by the window, his eyes scanning the horizon. As they approached a checkpoint, Tade noticed a group of police officers standing in the middle of the road, motioning for the bus to stop. The driver grumbled under his breath but complied, pulling the vehicle to a halt.
Everybody calm down for a stop and search.
One of the officers barked, his tone caught. Tade's heart raced. His mind immediately jumped to the wanted posters he had seen of him in Lagos.
Have they found me? Did someone recognize me?
His palms grew sweaty and his breathing quickened. As the other passengers stepped out, grumbling under their breath, Tade hesitated. His legs felt heavy, but he knew he couldn't stay in the bus. Slowly, he climbed down, his eyes darting nervously. The police officers moved from person to person, checking IDs and searching bags. When it was Tade's turn, fear overwhelmed him and he bolted. Passengers and officers alike watched in shock as Tade ran, his movements frantic and uncoordinated. "Stop! You will get yourself killed," a woman cried, but Tade didn't hear her. His mind was consumed by fear. Every step an instinctive flight from the consequences he thought were closing in on him. Just as he was about to cross the main road, his foot caught on a jagged stone and he stumbled. Time seemed to slow as he fell to the ground, the weight of his fear and exhaustion catching up on him. He tried to scramble to his feet, but before he could move, an oncoming truck ran over him. Tade's body lay motionless on the road, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. For the second time in his life, Tade had crossed the veil between the living and the dead, but this time there was no coming back. Somewhere in the shadows of the spirit world, Majoke watched. A faint knowing smile crossed her ghostly lips. "Balance has been restored," she whispered, her voice fading into the wind. If you enjoyed this story and would like to see more interesting and intriguing stories, please consider subscribing to this channel, not forgetting to turn on your bell notification icon so that once another video is being posted, you will be the first to be notified. You can also check out those videos here. I promise you won't be disappointed. Till we meet again in my next video, remain blessed.